Hello everyone, welcome back to Evoverse. This time Evoverse will recap the movie from 2015 titled Three-Headed Shark Attack. This movie tells the story of a giant three-headed shark that attacks and destroys a research laboratory on an island called Garbage Patch, which is an artificial island deliberately created from a collection of garbage that pollutes the ocean. But the results of the assessment gave birth to a giant three-headed shark. How is the next story? Let's review the storyline of this movie. We remind you all what we are going to say. This is a spoiler. For those of you who don't have a problem with spoilers, let's continue the story and enjoy. The movie begins by showing tourists who are enjoying their vacation on an island. Some of them are sunbathing and also playing. Soon one of the tourists named Brad invites Polly and Mark, who are dating, on the coast to swim. Polly accepted Brad's invitation while Mark remained on the coast. Until one day, suddenly a giant shark immediately ate Polly. Mark, who saw Polly being eaten by a shark, tried to find her in the water, but Mark also became the shark's meal. Not only that, but the three-headed shark also came ashore and preyed on the tourists there. The teenagers died instantly, leaving only Brad alone. The scene then moves to an underwater research laboratory called Garbage Patch, where a professor named Laura and Nelson are guiding the interns in the laboratory. The interns consist of Maggie, Greg, Allison, Ryan, and Omar. Laura asked Nelson to take the interns around the research area. In that place, they all saw for themselves the various conditions of marine animals that had been polluted by pollution. These animals became victims of the ferocity of the garbage that had been dumped by irresponsible people into the ocean. In addition to causing death to marine animals, there are also some who are still able to survive. But the animals that are able to live have the potential to mutate and make them very ferocious. One of the fish there showed a very strange behavior, and usually small animals behave like that because they feel threatened by the presence of a deadly predator. Nelson, who noticed the strange behavior, immediately contacted Steve, who was with Laura at the time, to find out what had happened. And Steve saw something strange and large heading towards the surface of the sea, so Laura took the initiative to find out more. The interns were immediately worried because the alarm in the laboratory did not stop sounding. Meanwhile, on land, a lighthouse keeper saw a large shadow approaching him. He tried to approach the shadow, thinking it was that of a whale. But in fact, it suddenly disappeared as Laura's group arrived. They immediately asked the lighthouse keeper to leave the water. But just then, a giant three-headed shark came and ate the lighthouse keeper. He died instantly, while Laura and the others went straight back to the research site. In addition, the three-headed shark began attacking the lab blindly, and the attack caused the lab to leak heavily. By this time, many employees had died because of the giant shark. One of them was an employee who was in the toilet at the time. The increasingly panicked situation made Laura make an immediate decision, where everyone was immediately asked to return to the land. While the relentless shark kept banging its head against the lab and causing it to explode instantly. Luckily, Laura, Nelson, and the interns managed to get out before the explosion happened, while the others had to die without any chance of survival. Now those who were left were trying to get a boat to get out of the deadly waters. But the only boat left seemed to be far out in the ocean. As a result, one of the interns named Greg ventured out, and he intended to swim to retrieve the boat, which inevitably had to race against time, where it seemed that the shark kept circling in the polluted waters. And fortunately, Greg managed to reach the boat in a matter of seconds. But the problem didn't quite stop there. Somehow the engine of the boat turned out to have been damaged, and Greg himself did not understand about the engine. Ryan, who understood a little about the mechanism of an engine, immediately ventured to swim and help Greg. Fortunately, the shark did not realize it. When Greg and Ryan tried to start the boat, an explosion from the laboratory occurred again. Allison, who was frightened by the explosion, immediately swam to Ryan and Greg. Immediately Omar, who was worried about Allison, followed her into the water, where unfortunately Omar's fate was not as good as Allison's. He had to become the food of a three-headed shark and was eaten alive. On the other hand, the boat that had been lit was again having problems, and they were forced to swim in the water no matter what the risk. Laura also had to catch up with Omar, where she had to become a second meal for the ferocious shark. Meanwhile, Maggie and the professor had managed to board the boat that had been lit. Quickly, Brad ran the boat while being followed by the shark. Ryan also tried to call for help using the radio in the boat. Suddenly, he was immediately connected to a group of fishermen led by a man named Max, where at that time, Max and his two friends were hunting in the middle of the ocean. Here Max did not believe in the existence of a three-headed shark. But in the end, he believed and tried to get to them all. At the same time, the shark was seen turning around and heading toward a cruise ship. Unfortunately, the ship was filled with a group of teenagers who were partying. Professor Nelson also knows a fact, where this shark will approach and go crazy with something that smells of garbage. And it is clear that the biggest source of garbage always comes from humans themselves. The result is that the shark blindly continues to crash into the body of the ship, so that the tourists who fall into the water have immediately preyed upon one by one. After that, Professor Nelson's entourage was seen approaching the cruise ship. They tried to help some survivors, but unfortunately, not everyone could be taken because of limited space. Until shortly thereafter, the three-headed shark began to attack the ship. The crazy attack made Professor Nelson die instantly. Then Maggie asked the remaining people to immediately leave the cruise ship, which would soon sink. And because of the limited passengers in the small boat, Ryan decided to fight the giant shark. But instead of winning, he died after the shark ambushed him suddenly. Everyone was in constant hysterics, and they had no other choice but to run away to seek refuge, which then they found a nearby island. Seeing the island, they felt they had a greater hope of survival than before. Meanwhile, Max's group, who was on their way, had now encountered the giant shark. Max's men tried to shoot at the shark, but the two men became victims without being able to fight back. Inevitably, Max could only shoot at the shark with the remaining bullets, and after the bullets ran out, Max immediately took a machete. Amazingly, he managed to cut off one of the heads of the shark. They were happy because they thought the shark had just died, but what happened now was completely unexpected. The shark came back to life and Max had to be eaten by the shark. Suddenly, everyone was running scared, and they accidentally met the only tourist who survived at the beginning of the movie, namely Brad. As it turns out, the events at the beginning of the movie were much worse, and all of that can be seen from the scattered bodies. This time they are really in a very tense and confusing situation. But Maggie remembers something that Professor Nelson once said before he died, where the giant shark is only interested in pollution and garbage that is scattered. Therefore, they decided to split into two groups and two different boats. Ellison was with the tourists, while Maggie was with Brad and Brian. Meanwhile, the shark that had lost one head apparently began to mutate and grow three heads at once. The shark immediately approached the boat that Ellison was riding. Maggie continued to make various efforts to tell her friend, but because the distance was not possible, Ellison and the others did not realize it. And unfortunately, unexpectedly, the ferocious shark jumped and blew up the boat. From here, the remaining people no longer had a choice but to fight back, because if not, the shark would continue to be a big disaster. They also went back to the garbage patch because there was a lot of garbage there, which was expected that the shark would go crazy and hit all 5 of their heads, and by using the garbage on the ship, the survivors lured the shark to immediately pursue. Until a man named Stanley had to lose one of his hands because he was attacked by the shark. Maggie immediately gave helps to Stanley. Unexpectedly, Stanley had another option where he would sacrifice himself to open the garbage bag. That way, the shark would get out of control and they would destroy each other. At this point, Greg had actually tried to prevent the plan, but Stanley insisted on going and had to end up being eaten by the shark. But the happy ending was felt right away when the ferocious sharks began to go crazy and eat each other. Then the scene immediately closed with the survival of Greg and Maggie. It was clear that they both immediately got help from the police on patrol. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button, and see you on the next movie recap.